Welcome to Echoes of the Midnight, a channel where every whisper hides a haunting truth. Sit back, turn off the lights, and let the midnight tales pull you into their chilling embrace. The question is, can you make it to the end?
Maia had always sought peace. After years of relentless city noise, ceaseless traffic, crowded streets, the digital hum of technology, she longed for an escape. Her mind had grown weary of the hustle, and her heart ached for something quieter, simpler, a place where time moved at a gentler pace. When Aunt Eleanor extended an invitation to stay at her cottage in Eldrin's Hollow, a remote village hidden deep within a forgotten forest, Maia saw it as a chance to reset. The late afternoon sun filtered through the trees as she arrived, casting golden light over the winding road. Crisp air carried the earthy scent of moss and pine. The village appeared frozen in time, no blaring horns, no flickering billboards, no throngs of rushing people. Only cobbled streets, ivy-clad stone walls, and the occasional bird call. Yet, as serene as it was, an unfamiliar unease prickled at her senses. The villagers moved slowly, their faces polite but oddly blank. When they smiled at Maia, the expressions were warm yet strangely hollow, their gazes never lingering long. It was subtle but undeniable, an undercurrent of something wrong. She chalked it up to her exhaustion, brushing the feeling aside as she reached the cottage at the village's edge. Eleanor was waiting on the porch, her figure framed by the amber glow of twilight. She'd aged since Maia last saw her, her features softer, her eyes lined with a weariness that ran deeper than years. "Welcome, my dear," Eleanor greeted warmly, though her voice carried a peculiar weight. Maia returned the smile, stepping into the cozy interior. The scent of hearty stew mingled with the warmth of a crackling fire, wrapping around her like a comforting embrace. Ivy clung to the stone walls outside, and soft light bathed the room. It felt right, a world away from the chaos she'd left behind. As they sat down to dinner, Eleanor hesitated before speaking. "There's something about Eldrin's Hollow," her voice dropped, and she glanced toward the window. Maia caught the shift in her tone but was too absorbed by the peaceful evening to press her aunt for details. "I'm just glad to be here," she replied lightly, savoring the simplicity. That night, as the village settled into quiet, Maia lay in bed, lulled by the faint rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. The house itself was silent, almost unnaturally so. Her mind wandered, half asleep, until the quiet pressed too heavily on her chest. It wasn't like the city's noise or even the forest's solitude, it was as though the night held its breath, waiting. Maia turned restlessly, her thoughts tangled with unease. Finally, sleep overtook her, deep and thick, pulling her into a stillness she couldn't quite shake. Sleep came swiftly, pulling Maia under with a strange, unnatural weight. This was not ordinary rest, it was deeper, heavier, as though the night itself wrapped her in an unyielding cocoon. It was the kind of slumber that blurred the line between dreams and reality. When Maia opened her eyes, she was no longer in her bed. The village square stretched out before her, cloaked in an unnatural stillness. The cobblestones glistened as if from recent rain, yet the air was dry and lifeless. A dim street lamp flickered above her, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to twist and stretch unnaturally. The silence pressed against her ears, broken only by the echo of soft, rhythmic footsteps. They sounded distant yet impossibly close, tapping against the cobblestones with a cadence that set her nerves on edge. Maia turned quickly, her heart pounding, but the square was empty, desolate, save for the shadows that shifted at the edge of her vision. She tried to shake the unease, telling herself it was just a dream. But the dream felt too vivid, the air too cold, the shadows too alive. A knot tightened in her stomach as she realized she wasn't merely a spectator in this strange world she was trapped within. Then, she saw a figure at the edge of the square. At first, it was little more than a blur, flickering like a faulty projection. Slowly, it coalesced into a tall, gaunt silhouette. The figure's movements were jerky, wrong, as though it struggled to remain tethered to the world. Its form was made of shadows, its face a void of darkness, empty yet filled with an oppressive presence. Maia's breath hitched as the figure took a step closer, its long limbs moving with unnatural fluidity. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her legs felt as if rooted to the ground. "Wake up," she whispered to herself, the words barely audible over the thundering of her heart. The figure stopped mere feet away, looming over her. A suffocating chill radiated from its form, seeping into her bones. Then, without warning, it leaned forward. Maia's body trembled, every muscle locked in place. When it spoke, its voice wasn't a sound, it was a feeling, a vibration deep within her skull. The words were foreign, guttural, resonating with an ancient malice that made her chest tighten. Though she couldn't understand them, their meaning filled her mind with a sense of dread. Her pulse roared in her ears, and she willed herself to move, to scream, to do anything, but the dream held her captive. The shadows around her grew thicker, closing in as if alive, wrapping her in their cold embrace. A sudden toll of the village bell shattered the oppressive silence, loud and jarring. The figure recoiled, its form flickering violently before dissolving into the surrounding darkness. With a gasp, Maia's eyes snapped open. She was back in her bed, drenched in sweat and gasping for air. The faint creaks of the house settling broke the stillness, grounding her in reality. But the dream lingered. The sensation of the shadow's presence, the weight of its gaze, and the echo of its guttural voice refused to fade. The room around her seemed darker, the corners filled with a shadow that felt almost sentient. "It was just a dream," she whispered, clutching the blanket tightly. But deep down, Maia knew the truth. The figure wasn't gone. It was waiting. Maia couldn't shake the dream. Its details clung to her mind, the flickering figure, the weight of its gaze, the echo of its hollow voice. Each time she closed her eyes, the shadows crept closer, as though waiting for her to return. But it wasn't just the dream. The village itself seemed to pulse with an undercurrent of unease. Its timeless charm now felt like a veneer stretched too thin, barely concealing something darker. The villagers were polite yet distant, their smiles lacking warmth. Conversations drifted aimlessly, their words like echoes of something forgotten. Determined to understand, Maia broached the subject with Aunt Eleanor one morning. Over steaming tea, she asked about Eldrin's Hollow, its history, its people, and the strange atmosphere that seemed to pervade every corner. "You'll hear stories," Eleanor said, her voice tight, eyes darting to the window. "Old superstitions about curses and restless spirits. Nonsense, really," but her hands trembled slightly as she sipped her tea. "Then why does it feel off?" Maia pressed gently. "The villagers, the silence at night, it's as if everyone's avoiding something." Eleanor sighed, setting her cup down with deliberate care. "You've only just arrived, my dear. Give it time. You'll adjust." But the words felt like a deflection, and Maia's unease deepened. Later that day, she wandered through the village, observing its peculiar stillness. The villagers moved as if on invisible tracks, their routines oddly synchronized. No children played in the streets, no one lingered to chat. It was a place where time seemed to loop endlessly, devoid of spontaneity. Drawn by curiosity, Maia ventured into the attic that evening. The air was thick with dust, the scent of age and neglect clinging to the wooden beams. Among the clutter, a cracked leather journal caught her eye. Its pages were fragile, the ink faded but still legible. The journal belonged to Eleanor's grandmother, Lillian. As Maia read, the cryptic entries painted a chilling picture of the village's past. "They say he came in the night," one entry began, the handwriting jagged, as if written in haste. "Vhorath, the dream sorcerer. He promised us power, immortality, but at what cost? Now the village sleeps, trapped in his shadow. We are the dream and he is the dreamer." Maia's pulse quickened as she flipped through the pages. The entry spoke of rituals performed in secret, of villagers disappearing only to return hollow-eyed, their memories fractured. Vhorath's name appeared repeatedly, linked to a dark spell that bound the village to an endless cycle of dreams. The final entry stopped her cold. The bell rings. The shadow calls. We feed him still. Maia sat back, her heart pounding. The dream wasn't just a figment of her imagination, it was a prison, a shared nightmare where the villagers were pawns in an ancient sorcerer's curse. When she confronted Eleanor that night, her aunt's reaction confirmed her fears. "You shouldn't have read that," Eleanor whispered, her face pale. "It's not safe to know too much." "Why?" Maia demanded, anger mixing with fear. "Why does no one speak of this? Why are we trapped here?" Eleanor looked at her with sorrowful eyes. "Because he's always watching, always listening, and he knows when you start to ask questions." That night, as the village bell tolled, Maia lay awake, her mind racing. The journal's words echoed in her thoughts, a relentless reminder of the truth she could no longer ignore. Eldrin's Hollow was not a sanctuary. It was a prison, and something ancient was holding the keys. Night after night, Maia's dreams grew darker, more vivid. What once felt like fleeting nightmares now became an undeniable reality, a realm where Eldrin's Hollow revealed its true, twisted nature. In these dreams, the village square loomed larger, its shadows stretching like living things. The faint flicker of the street lamp provided little comfort, as its light seemed to waver against the encroaching dark. Villagers wandered aimlessly in the dream, their faces blank and bodies moving as if guided by invisible strings. None spoke. None noticed Maia except for him. The shadow was always there, waiting at the edges of her vision. Vhorath's presence filled the air with a suffocating chill, his form flickering as though caught between dimensions. Each night, his voice low, guttural pressed into her mind, muttering words that resonated like an ancient curse. One night, Maia confronted him, desperate for answers. "Why do you haunt this place?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "You already know," came the reply, his words slithering through her thoughts. "This village is mine. They are mine. And soon you will be too." The dream shifted violently. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and the villagers' forms began to distort, their faces melting into shadows. The bell tolled, its sound reverberating through the square, shaking the air with a force that threatened to shatter her resolve. Maia awoke with a jolt, her breath ragged and her body drenched in sweat. She could no longer deny it. Vhorath wasn't just a specter of the past. He was still here, binding the villagers to his endless cycle of dreams. Driven by fear and determination, Maia returned to the journal. Among its cryptic pages, she discovered references to a ritual. "The curse must be broken in his domain," it read. "One must face the shadow where it is strongest." The words chilled her, but they also ignited a spark of resolve. The villagers, trapped in their waking slumber, couldn't save themselves. But perhaps Maia could. The more Maia uncovered, the more the village's grip on her tightened. Eldrin's Hollow, once a place of peace, had become a cage, a prison of dreams, bound by Vhorath's dark magic. The villagers, caught in an endless cycle, were nothing more than sleepwalkers, their souls feeding the curse that kept them trapped in an eternal slumber. Maia knew now that the curse was weakening, and Vhorath's hold over the village was slipping. His power had diminished over the centuries, but the cycle could not be broken without someone confronting him in the heart of his domain, the dream world. The journal, now dog-eared and covered in notes, spoke of an ancient ritual. The shadow can only be broken by the one who is not bound to the dream. The words echoed in Maia's mind. She had to face Vhorath in his own realm, where the lines between dreams and reality blurred. But how? She wasn't a sorceress. She wasn't even sure she had the strength to break the curse. But she had no choice. That night, as the village settled into its eerie calm, Maia sat in the village square, her heart pounding in her chest. The wind had died down, leaving only the distant toll of the bell to mark the passage of time. The shadows in the square were deepening, stretching longer, darker. They seemed to beckon her forward, pulling her toward the center of the village. Maia closed her eyes, breathing deeply, feeling the pulse of the village beneath her feet. She could hear the distant whispers, the voices of the trapped villagers, their minds imprisoned by Vhorath's spell. She could feel the weight of their suffering, pressing down on her. "Enough," Maia whispered to herself. "It ends tonight." The square seemed to shift, the familiar cobblestones warping beneath her. The air grew thick, heavy with an unnatural weight. When she opened her eyes, she was no longer in the square. She stood in the dream world, the air oppressive, the shadows alive with menace. Vhorath's presence loomed over her, his dark figure flickering at the edge of her vision. "You're too late," he whispered, his voice slithering through her thoughts. "You think you can break the cycle? You are nothing." Maia's heart raced, but she forced herself to stand tall. This was it. This was the moment she had been preparing for. She reached inside herself, tapping into the power she had only begun to understand. The journal had spoken of a way to confront him, but it was up to her to harness it. Vhorath's laughter echoed around her, dark and cold. He moved toward her, his form shifting and flickering, an ever-changing mass of shadow. Maia felt a pull in her chest, a tightening, as though he was trying to wrap his essence around her. But she would not be his. Not now. Maia focused, blocking out the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. The shadows pressed in, but she reached out, her hands glowing with a faint light, the power of her own will. Slowly, the shadows recoiled, twisting in agony as the light grew brighter, burning through the darkness. "You cannot win," Vhorath sneered, but his voice wavered. The light surged, and the dream world began to crack, the air vibrating with the force of the breaking curse. Vhorath's form flickered violently, his power weakening. The oppressive darkness lifted, replaced by the blinding light of Maia's will. With a final defiant scream, Vhorath's shadow shattered, dissolving into the air like smoke. The silence that followed was deafening. The village, the dream, everything, seemed to pause as if holding its breath. Maia stood alone in the emptiness, the weight of the curse lifting from her shoulders. The villagers were free. Maia awoke with a gasp, her body slick with sweat, heart racing. The world around her was still the soft creaks of the house settling, the distant call of an owl in the night. For a moment she wasn't sure if it had all been a dream. The weight of the curse, the darkness of Vhorath, had felt so real. She sat up, clutching the blanket, the quiet of the room pressing in on her. The village was free, at least it should be. The dream, the darkness, was gone. But as she listened to the distant ringing of the village bell, the unsettling certainty lingered in her chest. The bell's toll had been a constant in her time at Eldrin's Hollow, a reminder of the village's curse, of the power that had held it captive for so long. But now, the bell sounded different, soft, hollow, as if it were no longer a warning, but a farewell. Maia stood, pulling on her shoes and stepping outside into the cool night air. The village lay before her, bathed in moonlight, still and peaceful. The shadows that had once crept in every corner seemed to retreat, leaving only the quiet of the forest surrounding her. The oppressive weight of the curse had lifted, but something remained, an echo of the darkness that had once ruled this place. She walked through the cobblestone streets, her feet light against the stones, no longer burdened by the shadows. As she passed the houses, she noticed the villagers, some of them stirred, blinking as though they were waking from a long, deep sleep. They looked around, confused, but their eyes were no longer empty. They seemed alive again. A sudden voice called her name, and Maia turned. It was Aunt Eleanor, standing at the door of the cottage, her face softened with relief. "You did it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You freed us." Maia smiled, though a lingering sadness tugged at her heart. "I couldn't have done it without the journal," she replied, looking at her aunt. "You knew, didn't you?" Eleanor nodded, her eyes shadowed with regret. "I did, but I couldn't tell you. It wasn't safe. Vhorath's power is bound to the village, to the land itself. Even now, there are cracks in the dream that could reopen." Maia frowned. "You mean it's not over?" Eleanor shook her head, her gaze distant. "The dream has been broken, but it is fragile. The line between the waking world and the dream realm is thin. We are free for now, but the dream, it could return." Maia looked around, her heart heavy. The villagers were stirring, moving slowly but with purpose. Their faces, once blank, now showed signs of life. Some were laughing, some were crying, but they were awake. Eleanor took Maia's hand. "Thank you, my dear. You saved us all." Maia smiled softly, but as she looked up at the stars, The lingering feeling of the dream pressed against her chest. She had freed the village, but the shadow of Vhorath remained. The line between worlds was thin, and Maia knew she would always watch for the darkness that could return. For now, though, the village was at peace. And that, for a time, was enough.
Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe for more. See you next time.